Morning, it's Julie. Can you hear me?
Hey, Julie. Yes, we can.
Great.
Morning. Can you guys hear me? Give me a thumbs up.
I can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just let you know that the big smoke is freaking ugly.
We are live, but tell us more.
Well, it's not good.
What's ugly? Weather?
Yeah, rain, blowing. I'll give you a nice picture. Yonge Street garbage is sometime in the early morning.
No.
And so everyone puts the garbage out.
You just muted. Sarah just muted you.
Sarah muted me.
There you go. You're back.
Anyway, so all the storekeepers on Yonge Street put their garbage out so it gets picked up at night. And it was blowing to 80K yesterday afternoon. So it looked like the rapture.
It will blow all the way to Etobicoke.
It could. It'd find Councillor Susie.
It's kind of crazy here, eh?
Isn't it nuts?
The rain has come now too, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good times.
Yeah, we are live, Susie. We are live, just so that everybody knows.
Yeah, well,
we're broadcasting, but you can keep talking. But
there'll be no one watching us.
Don't use. They will if you start using 4-letter words.
Hey, I do actually appreciate that heads up because I'm unclear as to why we are this way.
This is live.
We don't have quorum. This is not like.
No, we have quorum. It's a committee, and I think 2 is quorum.
Oh,
we're actually done.
Okay,
perfect.
I think Julie is there, but not visible. We're ready to go. No. Oh. Okay. We're just awaiting the recruiter to join us, and then we'll get started. So is this Hurricane Hazel-esque winds?
It was last night. It was pretty. How was it walking the dogs?
I just dropped them off this morning. Yesterday it's windy. Yeah, what was it like in Port Carling in Muskoka, guys?
Sunny, warm.
Yeah, no, perfect.
I have Ring cameras. It's not.
Okay, you caught me. Welcome, John. You're muted.
I was going to say good morning. I apologize about being late. I checked my calendar. I realized I didn't have an invite in there. I thought I was there, but
there you go. We're all here now, and we're live, and we all are here. Right? Yeah. So I'm Peter Kelley. I'm going to call this meeting to order at whatever it is, 9:04. And just a couple of sort of matters before we move down to a presentation. there is no supplementary agenda, and based on the agenda as we have circulated, I'm asking whether there's any pecuniary interest to be disclosed. I see none and hear none, so I will say no. We have no delegations and we received no public comment, which brings me to item number 6, which is an invited presentation. And John, I'm going to try your last name as Stungevicius.
That's
but you're
close
probably going to
enough.
tell me.
I say it as Stungevicius, but John S. is fine with me. So.
All right. That's perfect. Okay, welcome. Glad to see you. I think probably in the interests of accelerating this process a little bit, we might just go around and have everybody introduce themselves so that you can put faces to names and understand who you're going to be working with for the next little bit.
Sure.
I'm going to start with Councillor Guy Burry, then Councillor Susan Mazan. I know Julie Stevens, CAO from the district, is on, although I don't see her. But Guy, why don't you just introduce yourself, and then Susie, and then Julie.
Well, everyone knows me, and I spent about an hour, a little over an hour with John on the phone last week to do my survey. So I'm delighted to see John again, and we do have about 1,000 people in common on LinkedIn.
Oh, there you go. Wow. Man. And you still can't find work.
No. No, I'm a lowly counselor.
No.
Sorry, just occurred to me. Susan.
Not a lowly counselor at all, Councillor Burry. Very nice to meet you, John. Susan Mazan. I'm a counselor in the township, deputy mayor. This is my second term of council alongside Mayor Kelley, and I'm pleased to be on this committee with you.
Thank you.
Julie, there you go. Oh, Julie's driving.
Julie's in the car. She's at Costco.
Yeah, I'm at a Tim Hortons on my way to a meeting, another meeting in Penetanguishene. My name's Julie Stevens. I'm the CAO for the District of Muskoka.
Morning, Julie.
I think your left turn signal's on. Okay,
John,
and we have...
John should know that Julie was the treasurer of the Township of Muskoka Lakes, so
Okay.
she has an absolutely brilliant understanding of the township.
Okay.
We also have our clerk Peroski here with us. You have met.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
And we have Sarah Lehman, who I think you've also met. And I am Peter Kelley. As I said, I'm chairing this thing, but also I am the mayor of the Township of Muskoka Lakes, and I look forward to working with you.
Okay.
So we're going to move on. You've got a presentation, and we'll actually put ourselves on mute and watch and listen. Welcome.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And it says, okay, Sarah's screen sharing my presentation. Okay, great. Okay. So before I start, I'll just give a quick introduction of myself. My name is Jon Stungevicius. I'm the lead recruiter on this particular search. I do have a familiarity with Muskoka myself. I have a cottage over in Browning Island, and I've done work for some of your neighboring municipalities. So I've been coming to call it the Muskoka area since roughly around 1999. So I do have familiarity with the community and the issues. So with that said, Sarah, you're going to be advancing slides for me, or can I do it? No, you are. Okay, so if we go to the next slide then. So generally speaking, when I start a search, what I like to do is connect with my selection committee and just go through the process. The process is in my proposal, but what I've put together is a number of slides. I'll keep them pretty high level, and I tend to talk a lot, so I'm going to continue my talking and take a pause after each slide for questions. So the agenda for today is one is executive search process overview. I call it my 20-page proposal on one slide. I go through that pretty quickly. And then what I do is I kind of break down the various phases of the project in greater detail. So you really have two opportunities to ask questions. One is the general slide, and then secondly, the stakeholder engagement. I did put in key dates. I think dates are pretty important in effective search because it's good for you, good for me, good for the candidates. Everyone tends to be busy, so setting aside time is pretty important. So that's really what I want to cover off for today. So this slide here is my executive search process. It's a busy slide, but I like to simplify things. So looking at this slide, the boxes at the top represent phases of the project. The arrow at the bottom with the weeks represents a timeline for typical search. And then the piece just above the timeline are what I call deliverables or outcomes of the project. And then above that and just below those boxes at the top, those are activities that take place. So I'm just going to spend no more than 4 minutes on this slide. But generally speaking, when I start a search, the most important piece is criteria development. We've done a fair number of CAO searches, and I'm going to say the job descriptions look the same. What does not look the same are basically priorities of council, the nuances of each community out there, and then what selection committee members and council members say, for that matter, are the qualities they're looking for in the next CAO. So as we launch our search, in this particular case, we've actually launched already, and with a relatively generic career ad, but still reflective of the community. We had a survey where we asked questions on basically short and long-term priorities, like what's happening the first 90 days, what are some of the objectives over the next 1 to 3 years, what you need to accomplish, and then longer term kind of confirmation of the key criteria that you're looking for. In this particular case, I've had the good fortune also of meeting your current CAO. So I know there's big shoes to fill, and you have a very competent leader. So I need to commend council on hiring such a capable person. Outcome of phase 1 is basically a stakeholder survey. The survey is confidential because when we did do it, it's confidential. It will be shared with the selection committee. There's a career ad, which is already posted, and then a position profile, which we have. And in this particular case, there have not been significant adjustments required. And then for, I guess, candidates that are considered, we have a number of links that we encourage them to read about some of the priorities and issues in your community. So I know you're doing a level of survey study, probably one of the most significant undertakings the new CAO will have to do. So that's the criteria development piece, where as we're getting started in a search, sometimes it's before we get started, sometimes it's when we get started. That's the first phase. The next phase is identification of candidates. That takes two components. One, we advertise, and in this particular case, we've advertised in quite a few places, all of the traditional municipal career sites that are detailed on following pages. But then the other piece basically is that we do research in the marketplace. We have done many CAO searches, probably I think close to 30 in the last 3 years. So we do have a fairly good network of candidates that are basically have traditional municipal experience. And then sometime I hear from councils or committees, well, we don't want the same traditional municipal, give us someone different. That typically means private sector. We do consider those people as part of the search, but I still feel that they need to have a very strong understanding of municipalities and how to work effectively with council. I always say councils are a whole lot different than boards because the dynamics of council, I'm going to say I'm never bored as a recruiter because there's always many varied opinions and many informed people at the council table. So that's the next phase, which is identification. From there, it's evaluation. We receive applications. Our research team collects them first. Then they come to me. I pick the candidates that I think are high potential. I normally start with a phone conversation. Phone turns to video pretty quickly. And then what we're doing, we're always assessing candidates against what we call the criteria of that's been laid out in the job description. When I present my long list to the committee, you'll see at the bottom there's this long list presentation. I call that my ABC list. I like to simplify things. If I do a normal search, a committee could get anywhere from 20 to 30 resumes. So to make reading of the 20 or 30 easier, I categorize them. A means I recommend. B means that there's some merit in discussing the candidate. A C is an FYI, meaning that yes, you should look at the resume. I don't recommend, but really, I'm just simply providing my informed opinion, no different than a CAO to council. And it's up to the selection committee to make the decisions on who you want to further. I do consider internals as part of the process. I don't normally like categorizing internals when I put them forth, but I do categorize at my own presentation stage, but I find I do separate the internals that applied, and that's for discussion. I do have a general philosophy on internals. If someone's in general working one level below the role, I typically recommend that they be considered. If they're 2 levels below, it would need to be extenuating circumstances that I would recommend them, because unless the direction I'm hearing is give us an out-of-box candidate with lots of potential we're going to coach, I kind of limit my positioning. On the deliverable piece, when I present, it's a selection committee that determines the shortlist. I provide advice. I do also suggest assessment tools for selection interviews. In this case, for round 1 interviews, assessment tools tend to be questions. And the round 1 interviews, we focus most of our questions on past experience. Round 2, when we've determined all the candidates have the skills you need, then it becomes a what can you do for me kind of conversation, more like a fit-based interview. And I guess I did have some questions for the committee as we kind of go through the process here. Round 1 interviews are typically with the selection committee. Round 2 interviews, in some cases, it's a selection committee making a recommendation to all of council. In other cases, it is all of council involved in the round 2 interviews. I think from my discussion with Sarah in this case here, we have a competent, capable selection committee, and you're going to provide a recommendation to all of council, but I'll be looking for clarification on that. We do psychometric assessments. Generally speaking, we look at emotional IQ and general leadership assessments. We recommend those for round 2 because there's effort to complete and a lot of reading for the committee. And at the end of the day, psychometrics, as a rule, they're considered 80% accurate. And what you're going to do is find out a bit more about the person's personality. And I've never had a particular client say yes or no on a psychometric assessment. So it's more validation that you're on the right track. When you select the candidate, we do references, background checks, social media checks, credit check for a CAO, any kind of credentials we need to verify what we do. And then we work with the selection committee to help facilitate the offer. And how offers get facilitated varies from client to client. Some cases we present, sometimes it's us taking it to point, and either director of HR, the mayor wants to run with that process, but we do help support in that exercise. And then outcome really is a signed offer, then we debrief on successful candidates. And then post-hiring, if the candidate's not familiar with the area and doesn't live there, we would offer some guidance in terms of what kind of communities that they may want to live in. Onboarding for CAOs, I find you're really hiring a capable leader. So most CAOs tend to have their own onboarding process, but that may just be orientation for the first 30 days or so. And I do that in conjunction with the director of HR and others. And then in this particular case, if there's a final report, we do those as needed. I would say if it's a selection committee making a recommendation to council, then we would provide all of council an overview of the search process, how we went through round 1 and round 2, and the rationale behind the recommendation, because in that particular case, you'd be seeking approval from council. And that is it on this particular slide. I'll have a quick pause and I'll see if there's any questions, knowing that we're going to explore these phases again a bit further on, but I'll be quiet and turn it to the committee.
Thank you, John. Does anyone have questions? I can't see anybody. I'll have to speak up.
Okay. Silence is normally my cue to go to the next slide. So
thank you.
Okay. So here's just a quick overview of phase 1. So phase 1 has already been initiated. So when we start a search, we collect as much info as we can about the municipality, because obviously we want to understand who you are. In this case, we know you, but I'm saying not all applicants applying will. So we, like exactly what you see there, we collect as much as we can on strat plans, financial statements, key initiatives, community profile, comp and benefits, and additional attractors. So that's for getting started. We did send out a survey. These are the questions that were in the survey. The survey is confidential, and we'll share our results afterwards. But I would say that just a general statement that not confidential is that the survey results are very well aligned with what you're looking for, which is basically a capable leader who can step into the shoes of the current CAO and help move the council agenda forward. And then knowing some of the priorities underway really helps me for the search. So that's that stakeholder engagement piece. That's in process and technically done. If we go to the next slide. This is just a quick overview on our sourcing strategy. So generally speaking, there's two components to it. So one is research. The other one is advertising. I'll speak about the advertising piece. Whenever I do a CAO search, I like to have broad exposure in the marketplace. So I basically advertise the role almost anywhere that you would consider advertising in a traditional municipal environment. And also I do have it posted on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has national exposure. So if there's those who say, well, find us private sector people have a great opportunity to apply for the role. We don't reach out to internals, just so you know. If they want to be considered, they apply to the role, but they're treated the same way as external candidates are. We have the same measures and the same bar for them. Our sourcing strategy, when I work on lower tier searches, I do focus on either lower tier or single tier for the most part. Not saying I'm not going to call people in an upper tier, but an upper tier, basically, it's a different kind of organization. And if someone's a long-serving upper tier person, I'd want to make sure that they're pretty clear on the difference between the two and call it the different dynamics. And then, as I said earlier, we do look at business leaders as well who might fit the municipal sector. Generally speaking, we're targeting people already at level. And if they're not at level, I'm looking for people who are capable of stepping into the role. That's usually one level below. On this particular case, I'll probably get 100 applicants, but I'm saying a lot of those candidates will come from LinkedIn. When candidates come from LinkedIn, generally speaking, they're not necessarily qualified for the role. So what I'm expecting in terms of people that have municipal experience, I'm going to take a guess that I'll probably have around 15 or 20 through the ads, and many won't be at level. Our actual research calls, I'll probably be making more than 300. And when I say calls, it's generally speaking an email. Having done a number of searches in the past, we have everyone's email addresses and contact info. So my philosophy is during an initial outreach stage, I have as broad exposure as possible. What's going to help us determine we're getting the right person will be the selection process. So, and most committees want to know that there's not a stone unturned. So that's kind of a philosophy for us when we do our research. I'm good for the next slide, Sarah. Oh, well, I guess before I carry on there, sorry. Any questions from anyone?
John, I have two. It's Peter Kelley.
Sure.
First of all, you mentioned that you don't reach out to internals,
no.
Which I understand that. Should we, or is that just basically off limits? We should just let nature take its course. That's number one. Number two, on a related sort of matter, if we get internal applicants and one or more of them are not selected for the job, do you sort of advise how we coach them back into second place?
The answer is well, I'll answer the first one first, okay? So in terms of internals, I think all the internals know that basically your CAO is retiring. So if you want to encourage them to apply, I guess anyone's welcome to encourage, but I find at the end of today, because I even find sometimes with selection committee members, because I encourage even selection committee members, or even for that matter, anyone on council or anyone, if you have a name to put forth, put it forth, because the philosophy here being the more the merrier. And I think as many people as possible should be encouraged to apply, but there is a process that will help select the candidates. And that process is a very fair, transparent, and equitable process. So you can encourage, nothing wrong with that whatsoever. So, and even if it's just people in other municipalities you think should apply, I'm going to say encourage as many as possible, because it does make the recruiter's life easier. So that's the response to the first one. The second one, in terms of how to handle internals, very simple philosophy here. Okay, I just finished a CAO search where I had 3 internals apply. I did another search, a chief of police, and I had like 7 internals apply. So it always becomes delicate. The great thing for me when I have an internal apply, they become the benchmark of who's being considered for the role, because there's 2 things here. This is my thinking. The internal, if they're not successful, typically only respects the decision if they have respect for the new leader and they say, well, I understand the decision, and there's something to be said for the new person that's being hired, and they're actually better than them in terms of their depth and breadth of experience or some other skill. So then it becomes an easy debrief. And generally speaking, what I normally do is I'm first point of contact for the candidates when they're unsuccessful. I do offer a short debrief with them as to the rationale behind the selection, why they weren't there. I may give them some advice on where they can learn. But generally speaking as well, there's usually a member of the selection committee that may follow up with the candidates, especially in the case for people that are, let's say, valued people if you want to keep. I find engagement is very important. And usually it's the mayor who does the follow-up with the internals. But I would normally have the first discussion, and then the mayor may have a follow-up discussion. So that's my usual process.
Perfect. Thank you. Anybody else with a question? I'm not hearing anything, John. Go ahead.
Okay. This is just a quick recap again for phase 3 and 4. And then, I guess that phase 3 is what I call the research stage. Okay, that's generally speaking, the researchers out in the marketplace. When we look at candidates, I guess, despite the fact that I said earlier, we have broad outreach. We do have broad outreach, but really to hone in on what I'm looking for, I use the term reputation, because a lot of clients, I say, oh, well, how are you going to validate? I had a client ask me once, and so we've gone through this long process and we're now at the end. How do we know we've got the right person? Well, this happened to me probably around 20 years ago. I struggled with the question. Now it's an easy question. And I say it's an easy question. When we're doing our research, we're really, reputation is often indicative of the person's capabilities. It's a small community in the municipal world. So we are looking at people that have a good reputation out there. I think that's who you'd like to hire. CAO hires are always visible. The media gets involved, so you want to make sure you're picking the right person for the role. So reputation is pretty important. And then I guess when we collect the candidates and it comes to me, I'm the recruiter, so I'll be validating candidates. I'm always validating candidates across criteria. So I call the recruiting process is a number of checkpoints. So initial checkpoints is through the researcher, because we are spending more time calling the people and trying to entice people with great reputations. Then when it comes to me, I'm doing another set of validations. In this case, I'm really validating candidates against the experience criteria that's laid out, which is experience, knowledge, and leadership attributes that everyone says they're looking for. And then it goes to the selection committee. When the selection committee gets candidates, I guess from me, my long list, any candidate on a recommend list or call it my B list, let's think about a recommendation or internals. All candidates prepare a short brief. The brief-based ask candidates to explain in their own words why they're keen on the role and how it fits into their life and career plans. Secondly, I ask about scope of accountability. What's the depth and breadth of your experience? My third question is I asked them to speak about their accomplishments, relative requirements of the role. Fourthly, I will ask them to detail any experience they have with boards, councils, and committees. The next one is education and other designations they may have achieved. And then my final question, which I find is an important one, if someone doesn't live in the community, what are their plans for getting themselves to the community? CAO jobs are not virtual jobs, they're in person. Everybody may have some flexibility on virtual policies, but you are looking for presence in the office. So I find that's kind of important reading. I used to prepare those on behalf of candidates. I have candidates prepare them now because to me, what they give you is reflective of the caliber work you're going to get from them as a leader. So I lay out the framework that tends to be somewhat different for each client, but candidates prepared. So you get that, you get the resume, you'll have a range of interview questions to consider, all tied basically back to the competencies. I'll offer recommendations, but ultimately selection committee will pick the questions. When I do the interviews, I generally speaking like to have round one based on experience, and round two is more focused on fit. Sometimes committees are impatient with me. I've had committees say, we don't like your questions. And I said, why not? Because I had one client, she didn't really care about the experience part. She said, I want to get into what the candidate's going to do for me and our priorities. So how we ultimately land on that will be a discussion, but my general approach is experience based in round one, fit in round two. And then in round two, we normally have a presentation. Presentation could be on top 3 to 5 priorities as the CAO. In your case, you have this level of service study. It could be around that and how candidates see dealing with, call it the dynamics and outcomes of that level of survey study. So, and then once again, we'll have the psychometric assessments for round two. Last piece then, when you select candidates and it goes to referencing and diligence, I do conduct thorough references. Many candidates have the notion that they're just going to give me who they want. I explain to candidates that the references are not technically a negotiation. I say in this case, I joke and I say, well, listen, the recruiter's not very sharp, but he's very linear in their thinking. So I'll always ask for past supervisors in your last, let's say, 3 roles. So if you're a CAO, it's a mayor. If it's a level below, it's generally speaking a CAO. And just an aside, how I handle things, like sometimes someone's been terminated from a particular role and they don't have a reference to provide. What I do in that case is explore the circumstances around that, because there are often good people who may not be in a role anymore because they just weren't aligned with council anymore and they couldn't support council direction. So I do like to understand the rationale, and I will share that with the committee, and then you can make those decisions. But if there's a lack of references to any one candidate, you would know that really before we get to the interview stage. It's not something you find out afterwards, because as I interview, I ask candidates, circumstances of leaving. So that's kind of my summary there on that evaluation piece. I'll take a pause and see if there are any questions before we go to our last slide.
Thanks, John. It's Peter Kelley. Got one more question for you.
Sure.
Do you do any kind of, or is it possible to get some sort of training on interviewing skills? Well, at least me, I talk better than I listen, and I don't think that leads to really a productive interview. I suspect I'm not alone too.
I guess the answer is yes. If a council member, committee member, let's say, they don't feel that they're necessarily have the skill. Put it this way, first off, I'm going to dispute your question. Okay, if you've been elected mayor, I'm going to say you're a highly competent individual who has lots of political acuity and understands people and relations and things like that. So I'm going to say that every committee member I see here will have the skills to do the job. But if you want to have a recap on sort of interviews and what to look for during the process, the answer is yes, I'm happy to provide that. The other thing, when we have questions that we ask, we do have kind of a loose scoring system, because candidates are evaluated on a 4-point scale. It's 0, 1, 2, or 3. 3 means they're great, 0 means the answer was horrible, and 1 and 2 are in between. So we do have that in our interview guides. And the questions are generally speaking fairly straightforward that we ask. They're all tied back to the competencies, and it becomes very obvious to people to whether candidates have the skill or not. But if you wanted to have a recap on interview and what to look for, 100%, because and it's not just based on the interview, because I guess in general selection tends to be based on a number of things. One is what's the person's track record as a leader. That's one criteria we look at, which is technically their resume. Secondly, it'll be their interview, how well the person performed during the interview. And then the other piece is really, I'm going to call it the referencing and diligence, and that kind of gets to the candidate's reputation. So there's a number of factors that are considered that are to a degree outside of the interview process. So it's a culmination of all those things. But yes, is the answer to your question.
Thank you. Anybody else with other questions?
Yeah, I have a question for Jon, and it's the kind of the balance between experience and fit. So much of my experience is in financial services and in the investment management business, and either you've got the experience or you don't. And 90% of the interview is around fit, cultural fit. How are you going to get along with the team? Being, the table stakes are you've got the experience to be able to do the kind of job. And I'm wondering, is that transportable here, or, I mean, literally, it's 90% fit. You look to make sure that they've got the experience. You check the references, and now it's all about, do I really want to work with this person, because it's a full-time job. Does that transport to the municipal sector, where this is my first CAO search?
Does that, so I mean, you're going to be applying?
No, I'm 65. I don't have enough runway.
I use the term, my term now for candidates that have later in their career, I use my executive term is gas in the tank. So
but you can always get refilled. Runway, you run out of it.
Okay. So so technically asking a question, would candidates from experience in other sectors be considered, right?
No, I'm more about, the experience for me when interviewing is kind of the table stakes. Like, do they have the kinds of experience that is going to lead them to be successful in the job? So and that is kind of the expectation. The likelihood is we're going to see 2 or 3 people that are equally experienced, and we're going to end up going with fit. Who's going to fit the culture of the township? Who's going to be able to work with the council? Because it like, this is a people business.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, there's lots of stuff that's just ticking boxes, and that's the experience piece. But being able to work with a pretty strong council, I think fit is going to be really important here. And I'm just wondering what where's the balance between the experience and the fit in finding the right candidate?
Well, I guess fit could probably going to be the most important piece, because when I look at candidates, candidates either have initially, let's say in the round 1, you're looking at candidates, they're either going to have experience or ability. So ability means if they haven't done it before, are they going to be able to answer the question? I even tell candidates sometimes, we're going to ask you a question where you have no experience in. So just turn the question around and speak about what you're going to do for the municipality in that particular instance. So the fit piece, I would say, is very important. And that's generally speaking assessed in the round 2 interview process, because councils are different. I've worked with lots of, I've had councils where they're split councils. They disparage other council members even during the interview process. So each council is pretty unique, and I find that's one of the exciting things to me about the municipal sector, because you got such a colorful group that comes together as council, and they're all learning how to work together. So I'd say the fit piece is hugely important, and you're going to be assessing that as you kind of go along the process, and I guess candidates can come from many walks of life. I've seen many candidates that have, I guess, come at it from a different sector. I could name names of people as sort of like Rob Adams, for example, used to be the CAO at Richard Stouffville. He was a private sector guy who reinvented himself as the municipal administrator, but he had the luxury of being a councillor, a mayor, and a warden before he moved over into municipal life. Nelson Santos, also over in Agila, Toronto, is another fellow who was able, once again, mayor and warden, who then reinvent himself as a municipal administrator. I think the CAO for Barrie used to be a council member before, private sector guy with no municipal experience. So all these people translate. So I guess part of what I look for is on the fit piece is who's excited about, call it, the municipal politics and community issues, because you genuinely got to be excited about these issues. So, but that's generally assessed during both phases of the interview, because you're going to be asking the questions, and we often ask even many interview questions around, because the CAO can often play a very good, significant role if council is open to it at the council table, helping facilitate, one, by providing good information, but then secondly, I find about bridging divisive thinking and getting people focused on what the real issues that matter are and not getting too hung up in the details. So we have a number of questions where we're going to assess those as we go along. Does that answer the question?
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. I don't hear anybody else, so we'll move on then, John.
Okay. This is just a quick recap of the evaluation approach, just so we're all on the same page here. I'm generally well, listen, I like to be efficient because I have a lot of work, so I like having a pretty structured approach. So structured, yet I'm going to say called informal, when you kind of get to know people. So generally speaking, round one interviews, I normally recommend about an hour. Sometimes committees think, well, an hour is not long enough, we need to spend more time. My view is that usually in the first 15 minutes, candidates are giving you enough indicators to help you determine whether they're appropriate or not for the role. And then really the rest of the questions you're asking are validation. Candidates will have already been vetted before they get to the interview table. So for you, and Councillor, this is to your question, when you're meeting people, you're really, as you're asking the questions, you're going to be asking fit. You're not asking, you're going to be thinking in the back of your mind, fit, will the person fit? But generally speaking, the format is I review the format. We have a quick welcome from the committee. We have 8 questions. I like to have the committee as participants asking the questions rather than recruiter. And then I always believe in a free format section where you can ask whatever you need to of the candidate. I think we all know the guidelines on where you can go and where you can't go, but really you should be allowed an opportunity for free format to help you get to know the candidate. Candidates get about 5 minutes of questions, but by the time they get to the interview stage, they're pretty already well ensconced in all the community issues. So it's rare for the candidates to have much more than 5 minutes of questions anyway. Post-interview, I like to get feedback right away. At that point, it's not a discussion. It's a one-way exchange of information where you share your thoughts on the candidates. And at least we kind of know perspective of the committee as we kind of go forth to the next candidate. So if we kind of run this process, you can be pretty efficient. You can actually be done a very comprehensive round one interview in 70 minutes. If you say, I don't have 70 minutes, I could still get it down to 60 and still run a good interview. So it depends on how much time you have in your hands. And then usually when you're having that process where you're sharing comments post-interview, let's say you interview 8 candidates, you'll all have heard the comments. So when it gets to the end of the journey, it'll be pretty clear on who you like and don't like already. And then I have my guidelines at the bottom. The guidelines are more when I'm dealing with an all of council as a selection committee. Like I've had other ones where I have, 14 people on a selection committee, meeting all of council. And some council members want to kind of, I'm going to use my term, blow in and blow out of interviews, that they show up for some and not for the others. If I'm going to, if I'm going to run a fair process, then from my point of view, a fair process means you really need to participate in all the interviews and heard. You can still sit in on the ones that you're not there, but you know, technically speaking, if someone asks me afterwards, was the process fair? Well, fair process means that you've participated in all the interviews to be eligible. So that's kind of my guidelines there. I have the term required. I use the term guideline because I don't want to sound like too much of a dictator, but technically that's I don't know any other way to do it. Any questions on this one?
I think that's
I got one.
Very fair expectation that everyone has to be present for every interview.
And does that include the candidate, or can we zoom in on, I mean, I'm not a big fan of Zoom, but somebody from Vancouver, is he going to fly out for round one, or is he going to try and catch us electronically, or what?
Well, so it's kind of up to the committee on how you want to run the interview. So general protocol in the industry, if you're having candidates fly out for interviews, usually that the client pays the travel expense for the candidate. So I would say that would be to be determined. So if you don't want to pay for the expense, then I would say you would do a Zoom interview.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
And just a question on that one for you, Mr. Mayor. So is it correct to say that the committee's preference is to do things in person for round one and round two?
I think the committee might be split, but that's certainly the mayor's preference. That's my preference. I don't know about the rest.
I wouldn't, I mean, I could not hire someone or recommend to hire someone without a face-to-face interview. So round two for sure has to be face-to-face. I mean, in my prior experience, I wouldn't hire someone without having a meal with them, but that's a little extreme.
Listen, you can have a meal as part of the process. I just did a search for municipality where in this case it was a 5-person mayor and council, and I said to them, I said, you're rather odd for a municipal group, and they're looking at me and saying, why are you saying that we're odd? And I said, well, because you're so nice to each other, and you always seem to come to conclusion in a very fair way, considering everyone's opinion. So in this particular case, they had 2 candidates they couldn't pick. They couldn't decide who they liked best. So I recommended, and the committee decided that the mayor should go out and have a discussion with the candidates, have that meal. That was part of the process, to be honest. And then the mayor came back to the committee with their impressions, and then the committee used their impressions to help further deliberate. So as long as you're doing the same thing for everyone, you can make whatever you want as part of the process.
If I could just add, I think this is what Councillor Burry just said. I would suggest that being in a hybrid situation for the round one interviews, where it's a bit more technical and expertise and ability, but the round two, where you're determining fit, I would prioritize in person as well.
So just so that I'm clear, Susan and Guy, do you mean that the candidate can zoom in, or that the interviewers can also participate electronically, or both?
Probably both.
Okay.
I think to be determined. I think we're clearly putting this as a priority and how we do this. So
now the question I have is how do you maintain confidentiality for the perspective for the people that are being interviewed? I mean, parading through the township office is kind of a little bit of a heads up. I mean, is there a way to run this that can keep the confidential nature of the candidates?
That's a good point.
I could offer a suggestion. So if you're doing in person, would I recommend council chambers? Probably not. There's a number of hotels in the area. When we do work for Bracebridge, I guess good or bad, we use the Quality Inn quite a bit in Bracebridge, but you also have a number of resorts in your area, all with conference and meeting rooms. So I would just pick one of those. And then getting to the question on basically the virtual or like how to do these round one interviews. that becomes eminently apparent when we present the long list and you pick your short list. So for example, if it turns out you have 6 candidates you want to interview, they all happen to be local to the area, and I would then just say interview them all in person. But if you have candidates all over the province being considered for the role, in that case, then you may want to consider doing it via video. The other thing I suggest to candidates, because I'm sitting here for the most part talking to my computer today. I see everyone's faces on the screen, but so effective leadership now, in my opinion, you need to be competent and capable in a variety of forms. So as a CAO, you have video calls are a fact of life now. So if you can't handle a video call and present well, I don't know if I want to be considering the person. It's equal abilities in a range of forms. That's my guidance to committees.
Yeah, John, I would turn that around. It's I'm much more interested in being able to read the person in person, and you can hide a lot on video, and it's much more difficult when you've got 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people in a room, and you get the body language, and that's where we're going to get fit.
Yeah.
And Julie's got her hand up.
Yeah, and Julie, just before you go, if technical competency counts for anything, I'm back to retirement. Julie, you're up.
Thank you. So just a couple of comments. I totally agree that round 2 should be in person. I think it's going to be really important for this group. As far as round 1, and thinking about what Jon said, this is someone who's maybe done an interview more recently than some of the rest of you. Doing an interview online through Zoom, I would recommend that you stick with one process in round 1. If you're going to allow some through Zoom, then I would probably do all of them through Zoom. And the reason I say that is that, people are pretty savvy now. They can have their their notes up of what they wanted, their key points that they want to get across, and they can do that through Zoom fairly easily with 2 screens. And so if you're doing some of them in person and some of them on Zoom, there may be an ability for someone to seem to be more savvy than someone else who's in person, who obviously has to navigate the social cues of just body language just a little bit differently. So I would just encourage us to maybe do a streamlined approach. So whatever we choose to do, it's the same for everybody.
Great point. Thank you. Okay. Next slide, I guess, for Jon.
Yeah. So this is just timelines. I think everyone already has their timelines in the calendar, like the ad is launched, the research been initiated. We're doing our kickoff today. I do have the stakeholder comments I could share at a later. They are confidential, so they can be shared afterwards. Our closing is April 12th, so we're kind of well in process now. And then I'll be doing my interviews roughly from the 7th to the 16th. You're going to get your long list package on the 17th. I think that, as far as I know, is if memory serves me, I think that's a Friday. So you'll have the weekend to look at them, and then we'll have our long list review meeting. So when you get your packages, I encourage everyone to have a good read. If there's any questions, you don't need to wait for the meeting. You can call me in advance for clarifications. But I always say decision making is a group, but questions I welcome. And other thing, when you do get your packages, I joke with everyone. I tell them I only work half days. So half days means there's 24 hours in a day. And when I wake up in the morning, I ask which 12 am I going to work. So you're welcome to call me at any time. The round 1 interviews, we already have our dates booked for that. So I think we have in total 8 hours of time. 8 hours of time means we can come for the interview. We could probably even do 7 candidates if it turned out you have that many, but most likely 5 to 6. And then around 2 candidates, we've got our date picked for that. I already have in there, to me, those are a must to have in person, especially for a CAO. And then post discussion, I guess we will do references and final selections and so forth. So I did have one question for the committee here. So when I do work in the municipal, usually I'm going to say usually, but I'm saying that there is no right or wrong process. So let's say if I'm working on a hospital CAO or an executive director in social services, things like that. In many cases there, a selection committee will go through the whole process, and they've actually been empowered to make a recommendation to the rest of the board. Like I just finished a hospital search. We had a 6-person selection committee. They interviewed round 1, round 2. We took one candidate forth to the board. The board did not interview the candidate, but they trusted the selection committee that they're making a good recommendation for them. So in this particular case, I am of the understanding that the selection committee has been empowered by all of council to go and run the whole process and bring back one candidate for recommendation. Is that correct, or am I incorrect on that?
I'm just going to defer to our clerk here, but my understanding is that that's really up to this committee to determine the next steps in the process to getting someone on board. And I can tell you, without having given it more than 10 seconds thought, the right way to do it is for this group to narrow to one and to present it for approval as a fait accompli to council as a whole, or to one of the committees, probably to council as a whole. But I don't think that I'll defer to Crystal here about whether that's how it was left.
Thank you. I'm happy to speak to that. The resolution is written in such a way that committee makes recommendation to council. It doesn't stipulate on what that recommendation is. So in past process, it has been one. So the last time that the township had undergone this process, it was one individual who was recommended to council for approval. But really, when it comes to process and what your recommendation is to council, it is at the discretion of the committee who's been appointed.
Thank you.
Yeah,
that's a good enough answer for you there, John?
Yeah. I just have one more question. This is more for candidate education. So when they're going through the process, then so the candidates will not meet all of council. Then the candidates will meet the selection committee. Is that correct? Because when the recommendation goes forth, it's one candidate being recommended who everyone's already agreed this is the person we want.
I think, I mean, I guess it's again, it's at the discretion of this committee. If it's useful and would make it easier for an approval, I suspect that the candidate could come to the council meeting and make a pitch or presentation. Wow. But I don't see council as a whole engaged in any of the selection process, just basically ratifying a decision made here.
Okay. Okay. That's clear to me. Thank you. That is my last slide here. Any other questions?
I'm not seeing any other questions. We are going to go into closed session to allow you the freedom to speak about, I think, survey results and some other matters, John, that you want to bring up, but not in the open forum. So unless there's other questions right now, we're going to lose a couple of people from this table. We're going to move into closed. A resolution to read on that one. Moved by Councillor Mazan, seconded by Councillor Burry. Be it resolved that closed session convene at 10:56 a.m. for personal matters about identifiable individuals, including municipal or local board employees, stakeholder survey review, pursuant to Section 239 sub 2 of the Municipal Act 2001. Any questions? None? All in favor? That carries. Thank you very much. So we are in closed. Not in closed yet. Sorry. We're going to take a 2-minute break, and we're not in closed because we can't talk. We got to disconnect from the broadcast. If you wouldn't mind taking a break until about 5 after 10, and then we'll come right back and move through this fairly crisply. Okay.
So same link. I'm just going on mute and so forth, right?
That's great. That's correct.
No problem.
Thank you.
So, thanks.
Do we get the same break?